This came to me off eBay a few weeks ago. A World War II navigation instrument. But the listing included something unexpected. A photograph of a man who owned it. Captain R.A. Slim Henderson. During the war, he flew transport missions across the Pacific. And after the war, he never got on an airplane again. This watch sat in a drawer for 81 years. And now it has one job. It has to earn the right to go back into the cockpit. Let's get into it. Hello, and welcome back to the Watchmaker Studio. Thanks for being here. I'm Les, and today in the studio we're working on a watch that was never meant to sit in a drawer. This is a Hamilton 4992B Master Navigation Watch, built during World War II for the U.S. Army Air Forces. Now, these weren't ordinary pocket watches. They were navigation instruments. Before GPS, before onboard computers, navigators relied on precise timekeeping to determine their position using celestial navigation. If your watch was off by even a few seconds, you could be miles off course. Accuracy wasn't a preference. It was the mission. Look at this dial. Instead of a 12-hour layout, it runs 24 hours. Because navigators couldn't afford to confuse morning and evening when calculating position. And printed here, GCT, Greenwich Civil Time. Slim's watch wasn't just keeping local time, it was keeping the world's time. And if you enjoy stories like this, watches with history, mechanical problems, and a little bit of mystery, consider subscribing. It helps the channel, and it helps me keep finding watches like this, the ones with a little history still ticking away inside them. Okay, let's open it up and let's take a look. Now, before we go any further, just take a look at this movement. That is stunning. I love working on old pocket watches because the finishing on them is just terrific. Geneva stripes across the bridges, you got polished screw heads, you got snailing on the wheels. None of that was necessary for function. No one in the cockpit would ever see this side of it, and yet Hamilton finished it anyway. That tells you something about the people who built it. You know, by 1942, Hamilton had stopped making civilian watches entirely. The factory in Lancaster shifted to full wartime production. Marine chronometers, deck watches, aircraft instruments, navigation watches like this, and like so many American factories during the war, the workforce changed. With so many men overseas, women stepped into roles that had traditionally been closed to them, including precision watchmaking. They weren't just keeping the lights on. They were building instruments that air crews, maybe even their brothers, husbands, or sons, would trust with their lives. It was a turning point, not just in manufacturing, but in how capability was seen. And whether it was built by a man preparing to ship out, or a woman stepping into a new role at the bench, the standard didn't change. It still had to be right. So at this point, I don't know what I'm going to find. The real answers usually don't show up until the movement is fully apart and every piece can be inspected on its own. So let's go ahead and take the hands off here and keep going. Then I'll store the hands away in the membrane box here to keep them from getting damaged. And then I'm putting a piece of silicone sheet over the watch face so it doesn't get damaged as I remove the hands. By the way, those hands, and they're on there tight. I tell you, they put them on there tight from the factory, which is probably part of the reason why they get damaged so often when the hands are being removed. So if you ever get an opportunity to work on this watch, just be careful there. These are becoming more and more rare, and the parts are getting harder and harder to find. That's for sure. Okay, so we're going to take the back off, and I put the crystal back on because I didn't want to damage the dial. And we're going to remove these two case screws and take the crystal back off. After pulling the stem out, the movement should fall out. There we go. So now we just have to unscrew the three screws on the side of the watch that are holding the dial in place, and then we'll put it aside for safekeeping. So this is where we see one of the key differences between the 4992B and the standard Hamilton 992B. This hour wheel has more teeth, On a normal 12-hour watch, the hour hand circles the dial twice a day. But on a 4992B, the hour hand makes one full trip around the dial in 24 hours. You know, after I bought the watch, I reached out to the seller to ask about the man in the photograph. She wrote back and told me something that stayed with me. She wrote, "He was my father. I don't have anyone to pass it to, and I'm afraid of what would happen to it after me. Thanks so much for being interested, and now I know I did the right thing." She went on to tell me more about his life. Captain R.A. Slim Henderson was born October 31st, 1922, in Halifax, Virginia. His father was wounded in the First World War at Belleau Wood. Slim flew with the 349th Troop Carrier Group, piloting C-46s and C-47s across the Pacific, transport missions, towing gliders, moving troops and equipment wherever they were needed. And on one trip, he told her his aircraft was filled with nothing but wristwatches. I bet they were probably A-11s, because that's what was given to all the troops back then. And after the war, he never set foot in an airplane again. 58 years in his drawer, another 23 in hers, 81 years. And that's the part I keep coming back to. This wasn't a souvenir watch. It wasn't jewelry. It wasn't something bought to mark a retirement or a birthday. This was issued equipment, a tool built for a job. And at some point, it was trusted by a man whose job could take him over thousands of miles of open ocean. And that's probably why this one feels different to me. I'm a veteran too, and when you're issued equipment in the military, it isn't just gear. It becomes part of the job, part of the routine, part of how you get home. Oh boy, now something's going. That screw's not coming out. I'm going to have to put some penetrating oil in there and come back to that. So I can still get this bridge off. I will take the bridge off and then I'll put some oil on it and let it soak a little bit. But that screw is not coming out. Now, as I was saying, bringing this watch back to spec matters. Not because it makes better numbers on the time grapher, but because that was the standard this watch was built to meet. It mattered to the men and women who built it, and it mattered to the men that depended on it every day. So it matters to me. So let's get the rest of these wheels out of here. You notice that as I'm pulling each one out, I'm taking a moment to inspect the wheel to make sure the pivots are straight, there's no damage, and any additional cleaning that might be required. So we're going to turn it over here, and I need to remove the keyless works. And I'll use my cannon pinion remover here to remove the cannon pinion. It makes light work of removing a cannon pinion. If you've ever had to take one off without a cannon pinion remover, you will probably quickly look for a way to get one. They don't come off very easily. And then once the cannon pinion came out, the center wheel dropped right off. Okay, yeah, it looks a little dirty. The pinions look like there's a little bit of dirt and stuff inside the pinion, so we got to clean that up. Now this here is the hacking mechanism. So this piece here, actually, that spring presses up against the balance wheel and stops the balance wheel when you pull the crown out, and it actually stops the watch. And it was important to be able to use that to align time. So when they were going out on a mission, they'd pull out the crown and set the time together so that they were all on the same time. So that was an important feature that this watch had. And a lot of watches now have that feature, but it wasn't very common back in the 1940s. So normally this is called the setting lever spring, but Hamilton calls this the setting cap spring. Okay, fine. And that's the yoke spring that I just took out, and then this is the yoke that I'm removing. Okay, we'll remove these intermediate wheels, which transfer the power from the crown as you turn it to the hands of the watch, and the minute wheel. And so let's put some of the penetrating oil on here. So I tried to take this off and it just was not budging. So I'm going to let this sit for a while and see if that penetrating oil will get in there and actually loosen that up. So now we're going to open the mainspring barrel and take the mainspring out. And we got to be careful here because, you know, old mainsprings can get closely tied to that barrel. And if you're not careful, it would just pop right out. So I'm using, well, that came out easier than I thought. That was a arbor vise to take out the arbor. So now I will carefully remove the mainspring and I will walk it out. Just like that. It's definitely an older mainspring. As you can see, it's got the blued steel. And I'm going to go ahead and replace this mainspring. This one seems a little tired. Okay, so now I'm going to do a little bit of pre-cleaning here with some IPA, also known as 99.9% isopropyl alcohol, and cleaning up any of the big residue that I see. The better I clean it, the less work that my cleaning machine has to do. So I'm also pegging the jewels. So this is important because we're talking about 80-year-old oil and grease that's in these jewels, and the cleaning machine just isn't going to get that out. You really have to get in there and scrub those out and use the pegwood to really get in there and remove that old oil and grease. Otherwise, that's really going to weigh down on the individual pivots. And for this particular watch, you know, we're really trying to get it to a very high level of performance, and there's no way that we're going to get it to the level of performance that we want if there's any of that old grease or any of that muck still in there. So we really got in there and clean it. I'm also going to be doing some pre-cleaning here, where I'm actually using both naphtha and some IPA to clean up different parts, because the more that I do here, the less work the watch cleaning machine has to do. And finally, I'm going to polish every one of these pivots. Every little bit of friction is super important in a movement like this, and I'm going to try to take out as much as possible before we even get into the watch cleaning machine. So I'm loosening this stud, the hairspring stud. I'm going to remove the hairspring so that I can take the balance wheel off of the balance cock and inspect the pivots. And we've got a problem. That is damage on that balance pivot. There's no way that I would be able to polish that out. Additionally, there is also the same damage on the center seconds pinion. Now this one I'm just going to have to replace, and I'm also going to do the same thing. I'm going to replace the balance staff, because there's no way that I would be able to get that balance staff back to where it needs to get if we really want this watch to perform the best that it can. So let's get into that. So taking off the hairspring here carefully. We don't want to damage that hairspring. Okay. And then I'm going to put the hairspring in this, basically this little tool that I have. It's just a hairspring adjustment tool, just to put it in there to keep it safe. Put it off to the side, and then we can focus on the balance staff. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to remove the roller tables. There's two roller tables on this staff. It has a safety roller table and the regular roller table. And I'm going to carefully use my staking set here with a stake that just fits onto the very tip of the balance staff. And then I'm going to just give it a couple of taps. There we go. And that roller came off. The two rollers came off, actually. And then we're turning the wheel over, and we're going to push this staff out. It is a friction fit balance staff, so it's actually a little bit easier. We just need to friction fit a new one in here. We don't have to rivet it back in. There we go. So there it is. The goal is to be able to remove the balance staff without damaging it. So it's already damaged, but it's fine. Here's a new balance staff. And we're going to just fit it in, turning the wheel over. And very carefully put it back in place. There we go, just a couple more taps. Perfect. Let's check it out. Yeah, we need to make sure that it seats all the way down onto that ledge there. And then let's put the roller table back on. And in case you're wondering, instead of using a regular hammer here, I'm using a watchmaker's drop hammer on the staking set. It gives a very controlled, straight downward strike, which is exactly what you want when you're working with a balance staff like this. It's specifically Westlake watchmaker drop hammer from the early 20th century. I doubt that you will find one. Don't ask me how to get one. I just got very lucky. Do you need it? Absolutely not. A hammer's fine, but as a tool geek, and I love tools, I saw it and I had to have it. So, in case you're wondering, that's what it is. Now I'm putting the safety roller here, and we need to make sure that we align the notch with the jewel, because that is what keeps the guard pin from stopping the watch. That notch cut out. If the notch is not in the right place, the guard pin on the paddle fork will hit that roller and stop the watch. But replacing the balance staff is the end of the job. Anytime the balance wheel is disturbed, it needs to be checked for poise. This is static poising. And for those of you who enjoy old tools doing real work, this poising tool is over 100 years old. The balance rests only on its pivots, and if one side is heavier, gravity will pull that heavy spot down. So I rotate the wheel, let it settle, and watch for the same area returning to the bottom. If it does, I'll do one of two things. I'll either remove some weight from the heavy spot if it lands on a poising screw, which is the shorter screws, or if it lands on a timing screw, I can screw it in slightly. Now it doesn't seem to be stopping in the same spot, so this balance is in poise. Okay, so now we're going to put the hairspring back on, and I'm not really going to use a hammer or anything for this, just my finger pressure on an appropriate size stake that has a hole big enough to fit the balance staff in it, and just push it down with my finger. And that's it. Make sure that it's seated all the way down, which it is. Looks good. All right, so we're going to put it back in the watch here, and we're going to put the balance cock back on, and put the stud back into the cock there, and check the action to make sure that everything is, there's no extra friction, it's spinning smoothly. I'm using this tool, which is a hairspring tool, to push the stud back to the right level, and then I'm tightening the screw to tighten on the stud. Let me check the action here, and it's running perfect. Looks good. So before continuing the assembly, I check the action of the balance, and right away I can see something's off. The impulse jewel isn't centered. That's beat error. That means the balance is swinging farther one side than the other, instead of dividing its motion evenly. Now to correct that, I'll use this tool that I made, that I turned on the lathe, and I drilled a hole in the front to leave a hole for the balance staff to fit in, and it has a tooth on the very end of it, basically, that fits into the seam of the hairspring and allows me to carefully turn it, because if you've ever turned a hairspring with a screwdriver, you run the risk of damaging the hairspring. So I made this little tool, makes it a little easier, and looks like we got it. We'll know for sure once I put it in the time grapher, but it looks pretty good. So now I'm just going to get everything into the cleaning baskets, and then we're going to get everything cleaned up, and then we can move on with the reassembly of the watch. So now that the major repair work is done, everything goes through the cleaning machine. All the old oil and contamination gets washed away so the movement can go back together, nice and clean. And the machine that I'm using here is a bit of a regular character here in the studio. It's my Uber Kiwi, which has Watchmaker Studio logo right on the screen, which is awesome. Now, it started as a Kickstarter project, and if you're interested in checking it out, I'll put a link in the description below. And so while it does its thing, this feels like a good moment to say thank you to my Patreon followers and supporters. We're building a nice community over there, and it's free to sign up and join the conversation. And if you sign up and support me, I will send you a welcome package with some Watchmaker Studio stickers and a thank you note. And a very special thanks goes to Dave, Brett, Christian, John, Brendan, McGeezer, Ken, Daniel, Harold and Lisa, Steve, Larry, Mole, Kevin, Ibsy, and Andy. Your support helps keep the studio running, helps cover parts, tools, research, and the occasional tiny piece of metal that launches itself into another dimension. So thank you. It really does make a difference. And if you're enjoying the video, hitting like, subscribing, and leaving a comment really does help the channel. And I mean that last part especially. I read and respond to every comment. So if you have a question, a correction, a story about one of these watches, or you just want to say hello, drop it below. And wow, these parts look great. They're all shiny, cleaned up, and ready to go. So now I just got to remember where they all go. Nah, shouldn't be too bad. And this is where the story changes a little, because this watch didn't just come with a history. It also has somewhere to go. This is an aircraft navigation watch case. It's heavy, it's purpose-built, and it was made to hold a watch like this in an aircraft cockpit. The opening on the top lets the navigator read the dial while the watch stays protected inside, and this case needed some attention of its own. The outside has started to rust, so I restored the exterior to protect it, but I left the inside alone, because that interior is part of its history. So the goal is not just to make the watch run, the goal is to make it worthy of going back in here. And to know what worthy actually means, we need to go back to the instructions written for this watch. This is a TM91575, a War Department technical manual given to military watchmakers for wrist watches, pocket watches, stopwatches, and clocks. And there's a detail in here that I absolutely love. In the section showing hands being removed from a pocket watch, they are using the same style of vintage hand remover that I use here in the studio. Same basic tool, same job, separated by about 80 years. So this technical manual gives us the broader military watchmaker context, but I also came across something even more specific. An original Army Air Forces technical manual written for the Hamilton 4992B. And right there on the cover it says restricted, which tells you something about what this watch really was. This wasn't just a pocket watch, it was part of the navigation system of a wartime aircraft. And now the case makes a little more sense. The instructions explain that the watch could be mounted face up in a soft iron case inside the airplane. That case helped shield it from stray magnetic fields from electrical equipment, while still allowing the dial to be read through the opening. The manual also gives us something even more important, a test procedure. It doesn't just tell you how to take the watch apart and put it back together. It tells you how to judge whether the watch is good enough. Room temperature rate, horizontal and vertical performance, stability as the mainspring runs down, temperature performance, and recovery afterward. So later when I say this watch is back in spec, I don't want that to be a feeling. I want it to be something we can measure. With the manual giving us the standard, now the watch has to be put back together well enough to meet it. And this is where the repair stops being one dramatic part replacement and becomes a watchmaking again. Every part has to go back in the right order, every pivot has to find its jewel, every screw has to go back where it belongs, and every point of friction needs the right amount of oil. Not too much, not too little, just enough. So the mainspring goes back into the barrel first because that is the power source for the entire watch. So we're going to wind it up and get it back into the barrel. Now the mainspring winders that I normally use, the Bergiano ones, there isn't one big enough that I have that actually works for pocket watches, so I have this old K&D mainspring winder that I'm using here. And you'll notice that I left the T-brace part of the mainspring out because it has to go into the notch that is in the barrel. We need to make sure it goes in there before we put the mainspring in. And that's what locks it in. We're going to push it in. There we go. There we go. All right. Don't go forward. Okay, good. And now we're going to put some 8200 grease on the mainspring. I also put some in the barrel for this. Sorry I didn't show that. And then I'm going to put a tiny bit of HP 1300 right where the arbor sits. And putting the arbor in a arbor pin vise so that I can put it in here and then give it a turn and actually make sure that it's working properly. And then I'll release it. And then we'll close this up and give it a nice snap. There we go. All right. A little bit of HP 1300 there. We'll get this barrel back in movement. All right. Spinning well. Okay, now since I had the balance cock already on the movement itself, this gives me an opportunity to take off the balance cock and actually clean and oil the jewel on the top of the balance cock. Now this is a little bit more intricate than like taking off an Inca block setting. You actually have to unscrew these screws, which then will take off the setting and also the regulator portion of the balance cock there. And we'll loosen the screw for the regulator adjustment screw, and then take off the regulator here. There we go. And then we can clean the jewel and then put the proper amount of oil on it. Okay, so now let's get it all back together. And I'm just bringing out all the old fun tools, huh? This is, well, it's funny, the instructions say it's the tool by the Fox Tool Company, Seattle, Washington. And it just does a good job of holding the regulator in place and keeps it from spinning while you screw it back in. It's a fun little vintage tool there. Okay, so now we're going to get the regulator screwed back on. Excuse me, the micrometer screw assembly. And then I'm going to use my automatic oiler to put the right amount of Mobius 9010 oil onto the jewel. There you can see a nice circle of oil. So that's good. And now we'll get it back onto the balance wheel and put it back together. All right, looks good. Good freedom of movement. Let's put this aside so we can finish reassembling the watch. Okay, so I thought I had video of me removing that screw, but I don't. Needless to say, it finally came loose after sitting overnight with the penetrating wheel. All right, so let's get the crown wheel back on here. And we have to make sure to align it with the pin of the wheel underneath it. And I'm going to use this brass tool to hold it gently and then tighten it up and get it back onto the movement. Okay, so here is the setting lever. I'm going to hold it while screwing in the setting lever screw from the other side. And I'm going to use a little bit of HP 1300 on each of the posts that hold the different wheels. And let's get the intermediate wheels here. And the minute wheel. And then we need to put some 9504 grease onto the winding pinion and clutch. Okay, and I'm going to use the crown to hold them in place. I slide them in. Excuse me, the winding stem to do that. And just make sure the action is working there. Okay, we're going to put the yoke in. And then we'll get the yoke spring in place. Hold it down. Again, this is always a dangerous move here because the springs loves to fly. Just hold it down with this brass tool while I get it in place. There we go. All right, and then let's get the setting cap spring screwed down here. And we're going to put some 9504 grease right where it interacts with the setting lever. Get that on there. There we go. And actually I needed to go back and put some 9504 grease on the setting lever screw. I had forgot to do that. Okay, making sure we're testing all the action. Looks good. Let's turn it back over. And I'll start by putting some HP 1300 on the post for the seconds setting lever, also known as the hacking mechanism. All right, and this is a spring for that seconds setting lever. And then we'll screw in the seconds setting cap. Just got to get it in place here. And then we'll screw it in. Okay. So now let's make sure that's working properly. There we go. And I'm going to put a little bit of HP 1300 where the barrel sits. Okay, so then let's get some HP 1300 on the center wheel. And I'll start by putting in the fourth wheel, the third wheel, and then the center wheel. Now, we need to get the bridge on here and make sure that the pivots for that third wheel and the center wheel are in the jewel. Okay, there we go. Let's get that one in here. Okay, good. Now we just tighten that up. And then let's get the click on here. And let's get a little bit of a HP 1300 on the post there of the click. Make sure the click spring goes right into that little hole on the click. All right. Screw that down, and then let's get the ratchet wheel on here. Again, some HP 1300. Make sure that it interacts properly with the click, and we screw it down. There we go. All right, we're testing it, making sure power from the mainspring is going all the way through the wheels. Looks good. Let's get that fourth wheel back on. I took it out to make sure that the wheels are spinning properly. And now the escape wheel. And now we will put on the bridge for those two wheels. You gotta carefully make sure that the pivots are in the jewels, because this is where you can easily break them. Okay, fell into place, good. Just gonna test it here. Everything's spinning freely, good. Let's get that screwed in. Okay, let's get the pallet fork in here. And the pallet fork bridge. Tighten it down, and then I'm going to put a little bit of wind into the watch just to make sure the power is getting all the way to the pallet fork. Making sure it snaps over. Good. Got power. Excellent. And now, moment of truth. Will it work? Changed the ballast staff. Did all this work. Got everything going. Will it run? This is the moment where everything becomes a watch again, or it becomes a very complicated collection of clean parts. Come on. There it is. The first beat in more than 80 years. Not dramatic, not loud, just steady. It really is a great feeling to get it running again after all these years. And it's running great. You can see it. Now let's get some oil on here. We need to get some oil. This is 90-10 oil we're putting on the third wheel, fourth wheel, and on the other side of the watch. Now this cap here is for both pivots there of the escape wheel and the fourth wheel. Let's clean them up real quickly, and then we're going to put some 90-10 oil and then carefully put the cap back on. Now I could have actually used my automatic oiler and done it from the other side, but I wanted to show you that you don't have to have an automatic oiler, that you can do it this way. You just have to be careful and not drop it and make a mess, but definitely doable. There you go. And I did the same thing with the balance wheel. I didn't need to show that same thing. Now this is the cap over the pallet fork. Now, normally you don't oil the pallet fork, but on this watch, the pivots on the pallet fork are specially designed just like the balance wheel pivots, and it's made to be oiled like that with an end stone. So it does take oil. And then I'm putting some oil, some 941 oil on the pallet stones, and then running all 15 teeth through. I did it 3 times, 5 teeth each time, and then ran them all through. And so now I'm using my hand tool to very specifically measure, press down on the center seconds pinion wheel, or center seconds wheel, excuse me. I need to make sure that it's the exact depth to properly mesh with the center seconds pinion. So this helped me to really control the depth. All right, there we go. And then we can check to make sure that they're meshing properly. Looks like it is. Perfect. But even with the watch running, this still isn't the moment to case it up. After replacing the balance staff and disturbing the balance assembly, I wanted the movement to run for a while and settle in. So I let it run for 24 hours and came back and checked the rates again. So static poising tells me whether the balance has a heavy spot at rest, but dynamic poising tells me how it behaves while the watch is actually running. That's why I'm turning the watch here through 8 vertical positions. I'm looking for a pattern. If the rate changes in a predictable way as the watch rotates, that can point to a heavy area on the balance. And on a watch adjusted in multiple positions, that matters. So before this goes back into the case, I make the final dynamic poising and timing adjustments, tiny changes, tiny effects, and occasionally tiny reasons to question your life choices, because dynamic poising takes forever. Okay, so now let's get this sucker all cased up. So I got a new crystal. We're gonna put a new crystal on the case. And I'm using the Version crystal tool here that will put some gentle pressure down on the crystal. And then we can put the bezel on and then just release the pressure and the crystal expands into the case. There we go. Alright, and now we need to get the dial on here. So I'm going to loosen the screws on the side, and I need to put some 9504 grease onto the winding stem. Get it in place. Tighten up the setting lever screw. Okay, let's get a little 9504 grease onto the cannon, or on the staff of the center wheel to put the cannon pinion on. There we go. And a little bit more grease, and then get the hour wheel on here. And we get the dial on. Make sure that meshes in. Okay, good. Now, let's get the hands in place. Again, I'm using that same tool to ensure that I am putting the hands at the exact right height. So I want to make sure the clearance is right on here. Now, because this watch does not have a calendar, I don't have to set it exactly at midnight, but I'm just going to get the hour hand on here first. Get it at the right height. And now let's get the minute hand, what I'm going to do is I'm going to put the hour right at the 6 o'clock point, which is normally 3 o'clock on a watch. I want that 90-degree angle. There we go. And I'm going to tighten down the minute hand now. Get it at the right height. And then here is the second tent. Now this is the important part that I mentioned before where a lot of these are damaged. It's very important that get pressed on very, very straight down. And that's why this tool is important. And I also want to make sure that it's the right height. There we go. Looks good. So now we have a watch we can put in the case. Taking out the crown and stem, get it into the case, put the crystal on so I can rest it on its face and then attach the case screws and also put the crown in. Setting lever screw to lock in the crown and then get the case screws in to hold the move into the case. Just gonna blow off some dust, put the case back on. Take the crystal back off just to make sure that I've gotten on any dust out from crystal here. I'll use my vacuum and compressor to blow some air on here. Use the vacuum on the crystal. Blow out any dust and then get it on here. Okay. Now comes the part that really matters. This isn't a factory laboratory certification, but it is a practical bench test built around the original standard. The manual calls for multi-day observed rate tests, and I'm working here with a time grapher and controlled temperature checks. But the targets are still targets, so I'm going to treat the manual like a scorecard. First, full positional test at room temperature. Check all 6 positions. Across all 6 positions, the average was half a second slow per day, minus 0.5. For a watch that spent 81 years in a drawer, that is a very good start. Then I let it run. And 12 hours later, I checked dial up and crown up. The average was plus 2 seconds per day. That tells me the watch is staying stable as the mainspring starts to wind down. Then after 24 hours, I tested again, and it was plus 0.17 seconds per day. Now the target is within 5 seconds per day, the actual essentially right on top of 0. That's a pass. And the positional spread is still controlled. Important comparison for the manual is horizontal versus vertical performance, and the watch stays within that 5-second window. It's another pass. But now we make it uncomfortable. The room temperature tests are the easy part. This watch was built for aircraft, changing conditions, and a navigator who needed the same answer whether the airplane was hot, cold, or somewhere in between. From this point on, the temperature and recovery checks were done in dial up and crown up. First, heat. At 35 degrees Celsius, 95 Fahrenheit, dial up was plus 2 and crown up was minus 1. So the average is plus 0.5 seconds per day, half a second. That is our hot test baseline. Next, cold. At 5 degrees Celsius, 41 Fahrenheit, the manual allows for no more than 10-second difference from the hot test. Dial up was plus 6, crown up was 0. The average, plus 3 seconds per day. Difference from heat, 2.5 seconds. Target, no more than 10. Actual, 2.5. Pass. Then came the test I really wanted to see. Minus 20 Celsius. Minus 4 Fahrenheit. That is not pocket watch weather. That is why did I agree to this weather? At this temperature, the manual allows the rate to differ from the 5-degree test by no more than 16 seconds. Dial up was plus 4 with 245 degrees of amplitude. crown up was 0 with 201 degrees of amplitude. You can definitely tell from the lower amplitude that the cold is affecting it that way, but it's still, the average is still plus 2 seconds per day. The difference from the 5-degree cold test was 1 second. The target, no more than 16. Actual 1. Pass. That one felt big, because that is an 81-year-old navigation instrument going into the cold and doing exactly what it was built to do. But passing the temperature test is only part of it. The final question is recovery. After heat, cold, and freeze, does it come back? So I brought the watch back to room temperature and let it settle, and checked the dial up and crown up again. Dial up was plus 4, crown up was 0. Average plus 2 seconds per day. The original room temperature dial up reading was plus 2. The recovery dial up reading was plus 4. Difference, 2 seconds. The target is within 5 seconds per day and within 4 seconds of the original room temperature rate. Actual plus 2 average with 2 second recovery difference. Pass. And that is it. That is the last box on the scorecard. That is the point where this stopped being just a repair. It became a return to service. This Hamilton did not just start running again. It proved itself. It went through the heat, it went through the cold, it went below freezing, and it came back. 81 years in a drawer, and it still met the standard. So now I can say, without softening it, mission standard achieved. I've been thinking about why Slim never flew again. Maybe some things belong to history, but this watch doesn't. His daughter wanted it to have a future. I think it does now. After 81 years, this watch is running again. It's been serviced, it's been tested, and it has earned its way back. Captain Henderson, sir, your watch is back in spec. I'll see you next time here in the Watchmaker Studio.